What is up, guys? Welcome to another video tutorial here at WebCrunch. This one pertains to Gulp.js, which is a toolkit that is used to kind of automate things in your development workflow. So if you're a front-end developer, back-end developer, any kind of developer in that, right, you can use this tool to help you kind of streamline things that would otherwise take an extremely long time or just be very manual to compile or something like that. So this Gulp is massive in terms of what it can do to help you. I primarily use it inside my Sass files, which is CSS in the end, and my JavaScript. It can also compress images. It can create SVG sprites. There's a ton of plugins. As you can see here, you can just search for a ton. If you use Babel, you can do that. Just a lot of stuff to help you in your workflow. There is a catch. If you use too many of these, obviously your environment needs to be, you either need to have a really fast computer or just something that can handle that much plugin power. So use them sparingly is my recommendation, but this guide is just to kind of walk you through how to set up a Gulp file and to get things rolling. To start, I made a new folder on my desktop. Before you do anything, if you're new to Gulp, it does depend on this thing called NPM, which is Node Package Manager. So to get it, you need to go to nodejs.org, and based on your system, it should display these download buttons. You can go ahead and download those for your convenience, whatever system you're on. Run the installer, and from there you should be good to go. I believe you might be able to install this with something else like Homebrew or something like that, but I haven't done it that way myself. So if there is, let me know in the comments if there is a way. So getting started, I actually have what I like to call my master file for a Gulp.js static site. I tend to work in WordPress primarily for marketing related sites for my agency that I work on during the day. A couple of creatives, check us out. On that one, it's kind of pertaining to more of the server I need to run on my local host. That's for the WordPress one. For this video, I'm going to do the static one so you can get it up and running on basically any site you use. So obviously I could just copy and paste this over, but I'm going to go step by step just to show you how I basically build this file out. So in a root folder, essentially all you need to get going, I believe, is just to index the HTML file. And I'll bump up the size here so you guys can see. I mean, realistically, we just need kind of a scaffold. I should have a snippet, but I'll just do this real quick. Title, Gulp tutorial, if I can spell, or EL. From here, I think we'll just go ahead and do body. This is very primitive. So with that said, I can open this file in our browser. It should display the title tag. Neat. Okay, so from here, basically we create a Gulp file. And to get Gulp initialized, we create a Gulp file.js. And going back to NPM, assuming you had that installed, it's a good idea to, I'm going to go to my desktop real quick and get this folder or CD into it. So CD Gulp. So if you want to see where I'm at right now, I'm in my actual root folder, my desktop, and then just the folder I have on the desktop. Since we're using Node, it's a good idea to generate a package.json file. This helps determine dependencies for your project, as well as if someone else were to source this project, if you version controlled it, say, you can define these dependencies that they don't have to necessarily download, but more or less when they run npm install, all of these dependencies will just come with their projects. So there's no breakage in the links of all these dependencies we're going to have. It'll go into more detail here in a second, but so to initialize npm, you just run npm init, and it does this utility. You can run through the wizard here. It has a lot of presets, so I'm just kind of, it needs to be lowercase. You can just use the defaults if you want. I usually do, but you can be more descriptive. Project about Gulp, building Gulp based development workflow. Entry point, this can be whatever. I'm just going to leave it as is. You can have tests, run tests to verify your code. I think there's a library called Mocha that a lot of developers use. I don't really do a ton of testing, but it's a good way to go about making sure your front-endness, and that's not a word, but like all your development is actually valid and everything's working. Git, if you have a repo already, you can establish that here. I don't at the moment. I'm not going to worry about Git in this video. Keywords, I don't know. Gulp, npm, author, you can put your name. License, yes, we're good. Cool. So by getting through that setup, we essentially have this package.json file, and this is a common theme you find in a lot of projects, no matter what task runner you're using, because there's other ones like Grunt or something else that's out there. I use Gulp. I just prefer it more. The syntax is a little cleaner to me, so if you were wondering why, that is why. Once we install some packages, which are essentially called plugins, there'll be a dependency section that generates automatically in this file. So that's why it's important we have this first. So to do that, first we need to obviously have Gulp to run all of this stuff. And then I use a few presets myself to get this thing going. So I'll do var Gulp, and we'll want to require that plugin, I think, to basically make it just function as is. We just need this. I think that's the bare bones. So if we were to, we need to actually install Gulp, which you just need this right here if you want. I don't know if there's like a real simple way to install it. I think it's just, yeah, here it is. So you can have an actual CLI. That's new, but that's cool. Okay. When I install dependencies, you essentially type this command for anything you do want to install. Let me clear that off. One thing to remember, you can, since it's Gulp, we'll type Gulp, but you want to also save dev. So you pass this flag, and this flag means that there's a dependency that saves in your project in the package.json file, but doesn't actually save in the project if you version it. So the file project itself won't be so massive to move around like in version control. So say your friend or partner at a company says they want to install, or decides to work on the project you're working on alongside you, and they do that through Git or version control. So they'll pull down this project, and at the moment when they pull it down, there's no plugins installed. But if they were to just run npm install, all of those dependencies would come through, because as you see when I install this, it'll, well, okay, let me do that again. Npm install. If you get that error, it just needs to be run as root. Gulp save dev. That's your password. Okay, I'm still getting an error. What's that mean? Under packet. Okay, I have Gulp installed. So I don't really need to save it as dev, so I can just do, I think I can do like Gulp version. Yeah, so I have it installed. If you don't, that should work and everything should be good to go. I have it installed globally, so we don't even need to install the save portion. So I'm kind of going off in a tangent here, but let me get back to where we were. Let's install the Gulp Sass plugin. I use Sass in my projects religiously now. I never went into using less or anything like that, but that's another topic for another time. And I think a JavaScript linter would throw errors if you don't do var on all these, which is kind of annoying, but whatever. So my essentially writing a task in Gulp looks at bare bones like this, but you can pass in a function within this task to do more things. So my Sass task, for instance, call it Sass, and then I'll pass in a function, close that. Inside here, you essentially, if you go to the Sass plugin, Gulp Sass, you can refer to the documentation on your own project, but essentially this is like the bare bones thing you need. So you'll return an actual source file, which is where it will look for your Sass files. And then if there's any errors, it'll log those, and then it will output or compile your CSS into a directory of your choice. So in my projects, I do return gulp.source, and generally I'll have an assets folder with a Sass folder inside that, and there'll be a primary Sass root style.css file, which I'll create here just to show by example. And then below that will be more folders and files, which are usually partials. So I'll create a new folder called assets. Inside that, I'll create Sass, a Sass directory. And inside that, I'll create a new file called style.scss. And usually what I do from there is import everything into that one file, so it compiles into a master CSS file. So in this directory, I tend to add a partials directory with an underscore in front of it, so it doesn't compile itself. And then going further inside that, you add whatever styles you want. So sometimes I'll just do like a base file to cover the tracks of some basic setup of my project. With that in mind, I would import partials, base, and you don't have to write the underscore here or this extension of the file name. So essentially, if you could see, we are going into the assets folder, the Sass folder, any other folders and files in between there, and then anything ending with .scss. So any of these will compile into this, which once we run Gulp, it will generate a style.scss file based on these extra parameters I'm about to add. In Gulp, everything kind of chains, so you do this pipe effect. There's no, if you see on the return here, I don't have a semicolon, which you might think would be natural, but it needs to chain to the next line, and it's just easier to read written this way. So the basic Sass plugin that we installed, you can pass in parameters to it. Again, look at the documentation if you're confused. Inside here, you can declare an output style, if I can spell, output style, and that's compressed. I like compressed. That just is what I would serve to a production server. So it's basically CSS that's minified, if you're not sure what that is. After that, you can continue on, and if Sass errors, like say you throw a wrong style in the mix, it will log that error using this command or method. And then finally, once that's done, you can pipe it to your destination folder, which is declared this way. And I'll do just the root directory. So if it compiles, I just want a Sass file right here, or a CSS file, I mean. So if all goes right, that should work. I've usually just, I'll be honest, I copy and paste this snippet and it works. So right now there's more things in the mix, but I want to see that this is working. So if we just run gulp, well, first, okay, I forgot one thing. We need to actually add that task to our gulp default. I could run gulp Sass and it would run, but I like to just kind of declare everything this way. So when I just run the actual key gulp, it should do its thing. Let me see. NPM install gulp. If using gulp under package error, also called gulp. Interesting. Oh, okay. It's saying, did you name your project the same as the dependency you're installing? That's gonna throw a conflict error. So let me rename my folder to, that was dumb on my part, but I didn't realize that was a thing. Let's see if I can rename this here. Doesn't look like it. I'll do it real quick. Let's call it gulp, or just gulp tutorial. And let's refresh the tree. All right, let's try this again. NPM install gulp save dev. And we're still getting that. What is going on? Okay, let me go here. This is why. You'd think I'd learn this by now. Yeah, okay. Got it. So yeah, word to the wise, don't name it the same as dependencies you're installing. That's new. Never knew that was a thing. Okay, so we got gulp installed. Let's run gulp. And we have an error. Awesome. Gulp Sass. Oh, I need to install gulp Sass too. So npm install gulp Sass save dev. And if you're new to gulp and all this npm stuff, don't worry. Like when I first started, I was using CodeKit, and that app works awesome for what I did. But I think with gulp and doing this all with a JavaScript task runner, you can have a bit more control on the way your code is output, generated, what order you declare things, yada yada yada. With CodeKit, it seemed like a little more unknown when it came to compiling my assets. Like I wanted my code to be as clean and minimal as possible. So this is why I jumped to gulp, and in time I got really used to it, so it's not a big deal. So as you saw, I just ran gulp and it worked. We didn't get any errors. Our style sheet was declared. If I were to just write a basic style in here, background, I don't know, gray, and run gulp again, it'll output that right there, and it's compressed like we declared, so there's no white space. So it's working. That's cool. And at this point it's doing barely anything, but our project, if we were to open it, well, I actually have to add the style sheet. Let's see, link style sheet href style.css. Cool, it should be gray. Awesome. So a big thing with task runners is obviously to do a lot of stuff on the fly. So you may see developers out there who use this, but their projects are updating in real time and stuff like that. All this stuff is just done behind the scenes, and that's the beauty of it all. I'll just continue on and optimize my project to look kind of like my snippet over on the right there. So auto prefixer require gulp auto prefixer. I'm just going to add all of these. I'm going to skip the image minification. It's really not a big deal. I don't use it so much anymore. Require gulp concat. So this plugin concatenates files. The one before it auto prefixes our CSS, which means I don't have to go in and add like this /webkit or /Mozilla type of handles on our CSS itself. Super useful. Require uglify is, I think, like a cleaner upper tool for our JavaScript. So when you do minify it and optimize it, compile it, all that stuff, it still functions and works and looks good. Gulp watch is a super useful tool. It's basically the reason you can do things on the fly and your browser updates automatically. So Gulp watch, and combined with other plugins, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, make it possible for your code to be updating behind the scenes without you having to run gulp each time like I just had to do. I'll do source maps. I love source maps. They are useful for Sass when your file counts get pretty massive. If you're using partials like I do, they in the browser can pinpoint to you what file or partial is actually maybe an error or where a style is defined that you need to update. It's just easier to see because my CSS in the end is compressed. If you try to view source on that stuff, it's the hardest thing in the world. Gulp Connect is what I use for a local server, which is this basically static HTTP server. You could use one that's built into your computer, but I just find that if I do stuff that's already working with Gulp itself, it's just kind of easier. You'll notice that all these plugins have Gulp as the prefix naming convention. It's on purpose because I think they may offer alternative plugins for, say, Grunt or any other kind of task runner. So I think we'll stop there and then continue building out the Sass file. So over here I didn't include source maps to start, just to get things going and make it simpler to understand. So when you do source maps, you have to initialize it, and you call it, which we're targeting source maps literally by the variable name, which we declared right there. So you initialize it, and then later on down the line, right after the error log, I do another pipe that writes the actual source maps, and that is declared in a file or a directory called maps, which we create by doing this. And again, this is all happening when you run Gulp. So on top of source maps, we go to auto prefixer, which is probably the best thing to ever happen to CSS. Like, not the actual auto prefixer stuff, but the prefixer stuff, but the actual automatification of it. Is that a word? Automatification. Did I just say that? Holy crap. Ignore me. But anyway, you can pass in parameters, much like we did the Sass task there. In this one, I do browsers, the last 2 versions, so you can actually target which browsers you want to support, which is awesome. And you do it like this, and comma separate this, and I do cascade false. And you'll notice none of these are ending in semicolons again, so all this stuff is just chaining. So if we were to write it all in line, it would all be one string, or not string, but one big declarative function going on, which gets heavy. So you can see what I mean. And I said in the beginning of the video, it was more or less something to watch out for. If you start using a ton of plugins, your system gets bogged down. So I mentioned this connect variable earlier. It's basically uses live reload, which is a plugin to reload your browser when there are changes, and the changes are signified by Gulp watch. So as you can see, a lot of things depend on other things here. And that's the last line of my task. So of course I need to end that with a semicolon. So at this point, we're using a lot of these plugins. I'll need to install each of these, and I'll do that right now. So to install, as you saw earlier, you do npm install, and you just type the name. I'll do a prefixer. Let me clear this for you guys. And then a space in between each, so you can do them all at once. Gulp, uglify, Gulp watch. If I can spell, Gulp source maps. I think that's right. I forgot the S. Gulp connect. Okay, so we also want to remember to do save dev, and I should have pointed this out earlier, but when you do that, we'll let this install. Those end up showing right here. See the dev dependencies? So like I said, in your version control file, you can choose to ignore node modules. So when you actually commit the changes, these don't shoot up to your repo. And in doing that, if someone else were to download this directory or project, they could just do an npm install, and it will take all of these and install it in the project directly. So it's automated in that regard as well. So it's really cool. And yeah, it's a lot of setup, but once you have it set up and say create a snippet like I do, it's really useful. So okay, so those are installed. I'm going to continue on. I'm going to create Gulp task server, and you can call that whatever you want, by the way. We'll pass a function here, and you simply define the server by doing connect server, and then you can pass in params, which we want to declare live reload true. That's it for that one. Don't forget your semicolon. So we'll actually need to add that, since it's a new task, in our default. A task for our HTML. So this is simply, I'm defining this so if we make any change in any HTML file, depending on whatever project you're working on, it will see that. based on its file naming convention, and that's targeted this way. And then once it sees any change there, we'll do another pipe and call connect reload. So we'll need to pass HTML here too, I believe. We won't actually, that just needs to be on watch. Okay, so then we'll do gulp task. Can't type. Live reload. And here we can declare what files to watch for the live reload. And typically, I mean, unless you really need to have every file, I tend to just use the actual ones that get compiled often. And that is usually my style sheet. I cannot type. And my JavaScript file. So then after that, we'll pipe another reload, connect that reload in that. We don't have a JavaScript file or directory yet, so I'll go ahead and create a JS directory. Inside, I'll put a dist folder and a dev folder. I do all my work in the dev folder, and everything that's compiled goes to the dist folder. So you'll see that once we get to the JavaScript task here, which I'll do right now. Go task JS function and we'll want to return gulp source. You see the pattern in these. It's just basically returning, okay, where is the stuff? Gulp finds it, and then it outputs it somewhere else, you know. So it's depending on what you want to do. And I created variables in my snippet over here. They're actually, it's an object of future variables, which actually is right here. And I'll actually just copy these. I'm going to put them up here though. So in the event that I have more than one script, which is probably going to happen, I like to create an object with these parameters inside of it, so you can access it by input.js. So if you don't want to compile everything or something individually, you can go that route. So we have JS input and JS output as the actual variables here. I'll actually do that. So as you see here, I'm targeting that JS input file, which is right here. And it's actually more than one file. So any files that are in the dev directory are going to be compiled into one in the assets or distribution directory. So I'll do pipe concat. We're using making use of concat at this point. And that's where all these files are joined and compiled. And then we run the uglify script. And it's actually that. And pipe. And then we'll declare our destination, which is in assets. Now if you're building this yourself, you might want to test at each milestone. that these things are working, because it's just easier to figure out. If it does error out, you can see it in the console. It just doesn't really tell you a descriptive error, like what line and stuff. But there's probably a plugin for that, so that's the beauty of all of this. So again, we'll run the reload on that, and so anything that's compiled will end up in our dist folder here. So if we were to create an app.js file here, and if I were to write any, I don't plan on it in this video, they'll output to this distribution folder. And finally, the biggest one that makes the most difference to me is the watch task. And inside here we create another function, close that with a semicolon. Here you declare what Gulp watch will watch. And you can target it literally file by file or directory, however you want. So of course I do my Sass folders, because when they change, I do want my browser to update and these scripts to run. You have to pass in the task name, and these you'll want to actually end with the semicolon, because these are actually commands. We'll do the JS folder, pretty much anything in the JS folder, and pass JS task. Finally, watch the HTML for grins, because why not? Why wouldn't you want free updates there? It should be dot, and we'll pass in that task. So the last thing to do is to make sure all of these tasks are declared in your Gulp default task, so you can just run Gulp instead of each of these at once, which would be a pain, right? We got live reload and JS in this project. I'm not doing images. So if all goes right, we should be in good shape. So I'm going to run Gulp. So I installed that. If I run Gulp, okay, Gulp source maps required is not defined. Typo. Try that again. Okay, we're still getting errors. It did start a server though. App is not defined. I think this is supposed to be browsers from the looks of it. What does my snippet tell me? Yep. It did work though, so let's run this one more time. Still doing an error. App is not defined. Where is that? App. It never fails. I think in almost any project I start this thing up and there's something going on that's just kind of weird. And that's probably my own doing. App. Okay. So it should be, needs to be in quotes, I think. Yeah. It's reading that as an object, and that's not what it is. It's a string. Okay. To kill the server, Control C on a Mac. I'll just hit the up arrow again to retype this. There we go. No errors. We're on localhost 8080 and a port 35729. Here's our here's our working site in all of its glory. So at this point I can make changes. I can go to red and see how it updated automatically. That is Gulp watch doing its thing. All the Gulp stuff going on. Cool. So we're basically ready to, build a project or whatever you want to do at this point. The hard part, I would say, is out of the way when you're starting into creating a Gulp file. It's really not a hard syntax to learn once you get used to it. Each plugin has its own documentation. Some of it's confusing. I'm confused on some of the bits myself. I don't always understand it, but Google is often comes to the rescue for me, and I recommend you try that too if you run into issues. So I hope this helped you guys. I may do another one to show you how I do it for WordPress specifically. It's a little bit different in terms of the server. That will be a video from another time. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you again.